The transfer rumor mill is in full chaos mode, and it's dragging some of the biggest clubs in Europe right into the spotlight. There are whispers that Arne Slot could already be on his way out at Liverpool, talk that feels dramatic, maybe even premature, but still impossible to ignore. At the same time, Arsenal appear to be circling one of Newcastle's standout stars, raising the obvious question: if someone new is coming in, who's making way? Then there's the headline grabber, Vinicius Jr. potentially heading to the Premier League. Not Madrid, not Barcelona, but England. London? Manchester? Maybe neither. And over at Manchester United, Manuel Ugarte could already be on the chopping block. Is this another expensive mistake quietly being erased, or part of a much-needed rebuild? Either way, there's no shortage of storylines unfolding at once. Amid all that noise, Arsenal's situation feels the most intense. The pressure on Mikel Arteta has reached a point where it's no longer subtle, it's an ultimatum. Win the Premier League or the Champions League, or face the consequences. Anything less simply won't cut it. It sounds brutal, and it is. Arsenal have already fallen short in the domestic cups, crashing out of the FA Cup and losing the Carabao Cup final to Manchester City. Two major opportunities gone, nothing added to the cabinet. Now, the margin for error has completely disappeared. But judging Arteta isn't straightforward. On one side, he has undeniably transformed the club. Arsenal are no longer scraping for fourth place and celebrating it like a trophy. They've evolved into a side with genuine ambition and expectation. On the other side, the most important metric in football remains unchanged: trophies. And that cabinet, despite all the progress, still looks painfully empty. Look at the squad and the investment behind it, and the expectations become even clearer. Arsenal have spent heavily, assembling one of the most expensive and talented squads in Europe. Of course, money alone doesn't guarantee success, it never has. But it does raise the ceiling, and Arsenal's ceiling right now should be sky high. The problem is that reality hasn't quite matched that potential. They continue to hover in that frustrating space of almost, never quite getting over the line. That's where the harsh comparisons begin. At clubs like Real Madrid or Bayern Munich, patience is a luxury that barely exists. With this level of investment and no major silverware, Arteta likely wouldn't have lasted long at either institution. Those clubs demand immediate results, not long-term projects that may or may not come good. Yet here's the dilemma Arsenal face: if not Arteta, then who? It's easy to call for change, but much harder to present a convincing alternative. There's no obvious elite replacement waiting in the wings. Do they take a gamble on an unproven manager? Turn to a familiar name like Cesc Fabregas and hope for the best? It's a risky move either way. Sacking Arteta might make sense in theory, but without a clear upgrade, it could just as easily set the club back. And that's the trap. Arsenal talk like a club ready to dominate, projecting ambition and confidence at every turn. But without decisive action, either full backing or a bold change, those ambitions risk becoming little more than theater. How long can the board continue to place their faith in the same project? And if that trust eventually runs out, who exactly steps in next? Elsewhere, Joao Cancelo's situation has taken a fascinating turn. What started as a cautious loan spell has quickly evolved into something much more concrete. Under Hansi Flick, Cancelo has gone from a player under evaluation to a trusted figure in the system. Barcelona have seen enough, they want him permanently. This isn't idle speculation either. The club has already begun working through Jorge Mendes, laying the groundwork behind the scenes. Even more telling is Cancelo's own stance. He's reportedly willing to take a pay cut to make the move happen, which says a lot about his desire to stay. Players don't give up money unless they genuinely believe in the project they're joining. Of course, the deal itself won't be straightforward. Cancelo still has a year left on his Al Hilal contract, and Barcelona's ideal scenario would be to bring him in for free. For that to happen, the player would need to negotiate an early exit, something that won't come easily given the financial power of Saudi clubs. Still, with the contract ticking down and all parties seemingly aligned, Barcelona's chances are far from unrealistic. What makes this situation different is that it's no longer just rumor or speculation. This is a clear club intention, a structured move taking shape behind the scenes. And in Barcelona's often chaotic transfer landscape, that level of clarity is surprisingly rare. Meanwhile, Liverpool's contract situation with Ibrahima Konate continues to drag on. Talks have been ongoing for well over a year, stretching into a saga that now feels almost as significant as any new signing. When negotiations last this long, it's rarely straightforward, and how it ends could have a major impact on Liverpool's defensive future. So where does that leave things right now? Still no signature. Not even a symbolic handshake. But for the first time since these talks began, there's been something real, actual movement instead of recycled speculation. The clock is ticking loudly too. Konate's contract is winding down, and Europe's biggest predators are already circling. Real Madrid, PSG, Bayern Munich, all ready to snap up a world-class centre-back without paying a transfer fee. For Liverpool, the stakes couldn't be higher. Losing him for free would land like a second blow in quick succession. Trent has already walked away without bringing in a fee, Salah is edging toward an early exit, and if Konate follows the same path, it stops looking like bad luck and starts resembling a deeper structural issue within the club. Yet behind the scenes, the tone has shifted. Reports from L'Equipe suggest that both sides have never been closer to an agreement. It hasn't been smooth, too far from it. Konate rejected the initial offer outright, viewing it as well below his value. Talk stalled, tension grew, and then, they quietly resumed. The reason is simple: timing. With the World Cup approaching, and at 26 years old right in his prime, he wants clarity. No drawn-out saga, no last-minute chaos, just certainty before the biggest stage in football. On the pitch, his season hasn't been flawless. Virgil van Dijk no longer looks like the immovable force he once was, and Liverpool's defense as a whole has had its shaky moments. But even with that context, letting Konate leave now, especially in a market where centre-back prices have spiraled into the absurd, would feel reckless to the point of negligence. Clubs are still lurking, waiting for any sign of collapse in negotiations. But the key detail is this: the player himself wants to stay. That shifts the balance. Now it's down to Liverpool, whether they can actually close the deal, or stumble at the final hurdle and watch it all unravel. Meanwhile, over in Madrid, there's a different kind of tension brewing. Real Madrid either seem reluctant to extend contracts these days, or they've made a calculated decision about Vinicius Jr.'s value. According to reports, the Brazilian winger is being quietly offered to multiple Premier League clubs ahead of the summer window, and not just one or two. Liverpool, Arsenal, Manchester City, Manchester United, Chelsea, essentially anyone capable of entering the conversation. The situation is layered with irony. Negotiations between Vinicius and Madrid have stalled completely. The player is asking for wages north of £500,000 per week, before bonuses even enter the discussion. Madrid's stance is equally firm: if an agreement can't be reached, they'll sell now rather than risk losing him for nothing in a year, a scenario they are determined to avoid after past experiences. But that figure creates a different problem entirely. Who in the Premier League can realistically absorb that kind of wage without destabilizing their entire structure? Arsenal and Liverpool both have sporting reasons to consider him. Arsenal need firepower on the left, Liverpool are bracing for life after Salah, but financially, it's a different story. £500,000 a week doesn't just stretch a wage bill, it tears through it. And then, almost lurking in the background, there's the Saudi Pro League, patient, well-funded, and more than willing to meet those demands without hesitation. They've already made their pitch, and crucially, Vinicius hasn't ruled it out. In fact, he hasn't ruled anything out. He's operating in complete silence, letting the situation develop around him. What you end up with is a classic transfer deadlock. The player isn't pushing to leave. The agents are actively exploring options. The club refuses to meet the demands. And suddenly, a situation that didn't need to escalate turns into a full-blown auction. At Manchester United, a different kind of story is unfolding. Manuel Ugarte's time at the club has been underwhelming, to put it kindly. Signed as a specialist defensive midfielder, he's looked effective without the ball, but almost redundant with it. In a system that demands technical quality and progression, that limitation has been hard to ignore. United appear ready to cut their losses. Potential destinations are already being discussed: Tottenham, possibly under a new tactical direction, Newcastle, and several Italian clubs keeping a close eye. But one name stands out unexpectedly: Galatasaray. The Turkish side came close to securing a deal back in January, only for United to hold firm due to the lack of a replacement. That obstacle won't exist forever. When the transfer window reopens, the context changes. Excuses fade, decisions sharpen, and Ugarte's future will likely be resolved one way or another. Whether it's a fresh start elsewhere or another twist in an already uncertain spell at Old Trafford, this is one situation that feels far closer to a conclusion than it did just a few months ago. Michael Carrick's side have surged into third place, but that rise has only sharpened the focus on what still needs fixing. The midfield, the engine room, has become the club's most urgent problem. And at the center of that issue sits Manuel Ugarte. His strengths are obvious: breaking up play, winning the ball, disrupting opponents. But everything that comes after that first action has been a struggle. In possession, the game seems to pass him by. Build-up play slows, attack stall, and too often United find themselves pinned back, unable to transition cleanly out of their own half. When you've spent around £50 million on a player who ends up being your weakest link in possession, it's not just a bad investment, it's a burden you're desperate to move on from. The solution almost writes itself. A move away, potentially to Galatasaray, would allow United to recover a portion of that fee, reset their midfield, and bring in someone capable of progressing the ball with confidence. More importantly, it would finally put an end to the lingering question that has followed his signing from day one: why did this move ever make sense in the first place? Arsenal, meanwhile, are approaching the summer window with a far more calculated mindset. This isn't about tearing everything down and starting again, it's about fine-tuning, making precise additions that elevate the squad. And interestingly, their focus seems to be shifting toward homegrown talent. Reports suggest the Gunners are targeting Anthony Gordon, Newcastle's relentless winger who plays with raw intensity and directness. The logic is clear. Arsenal want a strong English core, players who adapt instantly, understand the league, and bring a certain edge to the squad. Gordon fits that mold perfectly. His pace, aggression, and constant willingness to attack defenders align closely with what Mikel Arteta demands from his wide players. But as always, there's a complication. Newcastle aren't known for letting key players leave easily. However, there are growing indications that a summer reshuffle could be on the horizon. If departures begin, and names like Sandro Tonali have been loosely linked with moves, then opportunities could emerge. Even so, the financial side of the deal is where things become tricky. Gordon's valuation might sit around £45 million, but selling to a direct rival, especially one competing at the top end of the table, changes the equation entirely. The price could easily inflate into the £80 to £90 million range. And that raises a serious question: is that kind of fee justified for a player who, while highly effective, hasn't yet fully established himself among the elite? From Arsenal's perspective, the answer might still be yes. Rather than gambling on an unproven talent from abroad, they seem willing to invest heavily in a player who guarantees effort, intensity, and immediate impact. Gordon wouldn't necessarily walk straight into the starting lineup, but he would push players like Gabriel Martinelli and Leandro Trossard, creating internal competition that often defines title-winning squads. The only real doubt is whether that price tag aligns with Arsenal's broader financial strategy. At Liverpool, the situation feels far more volatile. Reports suggest that Arne Slot has already offered his resignation, not under pressure, but by choice. After a humiliating 4-0 defeat to Manchester City in the FA Cup, the cracks became impossible to ignore. But the result itself is only part of the story. The deeper issue lies in Slot's attempt to reshape the team in his own image, a process that, so far, has backfired. Last season, he inherited a perfectly balanced, title-winning side built by Jurgen Klopp and largely left it untouched. The result was immediate success. But once he began making changes, the structure started to unravel. Now, he's reportedly willing to step away at the end of the season, provided the club agrees to a fair settlement. It's not a dramatic dismissal or a drawn-out conflict, but rather a quiet, controlled exit strategy that suits both sides. What makes this even more complicated is the conflicting information coming out of the club. Some sources insist that Slot still has full backing from the board through to 2027. Others claim the decision has already been made behind closed doors. But his willingness to walk away shifts the entire situation. A mutual separation is far easier and cleaner than forcing a manager out and dealing with the fallout. And then there's the name quietly gaining momentum in the background, Xabi Alonso. Recently moved on from Real Madrid after reported dressing room tensions, his situation hasn't diminished his appeal on Merseyside. Quite the opposite. Alonso remains a revered figure at Liverpool, and his extraordinary work at Bayer Leverkusen still carries significant weight. One setback in Madrid doesn't erase that. There's something almost ironic about the whole scenario. Slot struggled to impose his own identity on a team he inherited. Alonso, meanwhile, faced difficulties maintaining control in an already established structure. And yet, he's the one being discussed as the potential solution. It's a reminder of how unpredictable football can be, and how quickly narratives can shift. Over in Barcelona, Dani Olmo's return continues to divide opinion. Nearly 2 years on, it's still unclear whether his signing has been a success or a disappointment. His quality is unquestionable, technically gifted, intelligent, and capable of influencing games at the highest level. But his fitness record tells a different story. Injuries have disrupted his rhythm to the point where reliability has become a serious concern. That uncertainty has naturally attracted attention from elsewhere. Reports indicate that Al-Qadsiya made a substantial offer, around €60 million for Barcelona, with a lucrative personal package worth €40 million over 4 years for Olmo himself. It was a serious proposal, the kind that would tempt many players. But Olmo turned it down. Not just that offer, but previous interest from clubs in England and France as well. His intention is clear: he wants to stay in Barcelona, establish himself fully, and become a key figure under Hansi Flick. It's an admirable stance, but it also raises an uncomfortable question. How long can both player and club continue to believe in that vision when injuries keep interrupting the process? Barcelona are effectively holding on to a player who spent significant stretches unavailable, while potential suitors walk away empty-handed again and again. In the end, it becomes a question of perspective. Is Olmo's loyalty the defining story, a player rejecting enormous financial incentives to stay true to his ambitions? Or is it Barcelona's ongoing uncertainty that stands out, a club unable to fully commit to whether he's a cornerstone of their future or an ongoing dilemma they can't quite solve?